about getting a sense of balance back into my life.
We all get to that point in our lives where we need to move on and be on our own.
I basically just like having the time by myself.
I've been living alone probably about 12, 13 years now. For a short period in that time, I have lived with somebody, but essentially I've lived alone for about 13 years.
Hi, Bush.
I was married for 23 years and then I got a divorce, and that's how I found myself on my own. I'm in a very difficult, or in a very different position to a lot of people. I'm an only child and I have no children of my own. So essentially, I'm an orphan. And my family is very, very small, like cousins and things. I try not to have too much of a routine because I've discovered that when you have a routine in your life and that suddenly falls away, that's when you can fall apart. So I try not to have routines. I try to have one day a week where it's totally unstructured and what happens will happen, or sometimes I might just plan to do absolutely nothing and indulge myself and have a lazy day. The nights are the hardest, and I've actually gotten very used to being on my own at night. So if I get invited out, I sometimes don't accept because I can't be bothered. I've had a full day and I think, no, just much rather stay at home.
Alice is one of a growing number of people living alone. A variety of factors contribute to this trend, and it's been evident for a considerable period of time.
I think the central, most significant demographic fact about Australia is the phenomenon of the shrinking household. It's not a sudden trend. It's been going on for 100 years. In the last 100 years, the population has increased 5-fold. The number of dwellings in Australia has increased 10-fold. But that trend towards smaller and smaller households has certainly accelerated in the last 30 years. A single-person household accounts for almost a quarter of all Australian households, more in our major capital cities. So that's the cutting edge of the trend towards the shrinking household.
I think a lot of things could be at work here. It's not necessarily a matter of choice. The living alone group is made up of 3 groups, roughly in equal proportions. Those who have never married, those who are divorced or separated, and those who are widowed. And obviously the widowed group, for example, it's not so much a matter of choice, but just their circumstances that are putting them in that category.
I was married very, very young in life. I was a young dad. I was 18 when my wife and I got married, expecting our first child. As with a lot of people nowadays, as time grew on, we grew apart. We made the decision a few years ago that we're going our own separate ways. For me, it was a large amount of adjustment. I decided to stay in the family house. And it was an adjustment from looking after myself, maintaining the house by myself, cooking, all the domestic duties, and really about being alone in the world for the first time. I have a lot of time on my hands, but it's mainly around weekends. During the week, I travel a lot with my work. It's when I get to weekends is when the aloneness will set in. The thing I like about living alone is the freedom, and it's having my own time and my own space, and being in control of when I want to be with people, when I don't want to be with people. I need my own space and I need my own retreat, and that's probably for me one of the key things about being alone.
What our research tells us is that people who've chosen to live alone and bear in mind they usually have a relatively limited period in mind, are pretty happy with their domestic arrangements. They enjoy the space, they enjoy the freedom, they love the sense of independence which allows them to make decisions entirely to please themselves about where they'll go, what they'll do, when they'll do it, who they'll do it with, and so on.
I think that partly the growth in these types of households is because people are wealthier and because share households are notoriously short-lived. So it's very hard to maintain a long-term sharing relationship with other people. And people did it much more in the past because they basically couldn't afford the rent on their own.
I've mostly had flatmates and people living with me as flatmates and sharing places over the years, and one partner. But I think in the end I just chose to live by myself and just have my own house. I spend my whole day being around people and talking to people and relating to people, so sometimes I just like literally being by myself. I'm free to do what I like at any time. I mean, I've got a pretty active social life, so I don't ever feel as if I'm by myself. I don't think I ever sort of like think, oh, you know, I'm lonely, or I've been by myself for too long. It's usually more of a relief that I'm by myself.
The time people spend alone doing what they want for themselves is something that many people value highly. It's an aspect of the individualism that's widespread in our society.
I think that individualism is one of the defining qualities of modern Western cultures, which contributes to the increase in the proportions of people living alone in a number of ways. These may be direct or indirect, voluntary or involuntary. I think essentially what individualism does is place the self at the centre of a framework of values and norms and beliefs, and so it tends to encourage things like independence, freedom and autonomy. And I think when you tend to do that, it's more likely that people are going to make choices that end up meaning that they are living alone.
There's no doubt that once people establish a pattern of living alone, they begin to adapt to the absence of domestic intimacy in their lives. Now, domestic intimacy is something that most of us find intensely fulfilling. We actually love sharing our lives with one other person or with a small family of other people. So we're enjoying intimacy on many levels, physical and psychological and sexual and so on. Now, the people who choose to live alone for long periods and make all of their social connections away from their domestic setting do run the risk of never rising to the challenge of intimacy.
I lived with my parents all my life, up until nearly 3 years ago now. I come from a Greek Cypriot background, so I guess it's not as encouraged in that background to move on and live on your own. I felt a little stifled, and in the environment I was in, I knew I wouldn't be able to develop that part of my life I wanted to develop while I was still at home. I don't think they totally understand why I would want to do something like this, why I would want to leave, a family base or being with people and want to just be totally on my own. That's something that they don't totally understand, and I don't expect them to. When I first walked in here, well, it was empty, but I felt very, very satisfied. This was my home, and I put myself here, and it wasn't just putting myself here financially. It was going through all those cultural hurdles as well, and just sitting here and thinking, I've actually made it. I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, now that you live on your own, you'll probably go out more and do, stay out late and all of that." But in fact, I don't, because I I cherish that time that I never really had.
The desire to be alone is not something people from every culture feel. Many people believe it's contrary to our primal need to be with other human beings.
Well, I think you have to look at the way we've evolved as human beings, and that's a very important aspect of our social nature. Humans are cooperative breeders, so they have to have other people around in order to develop. And so we have evolved to be social animals. I went to Vanuatu to do field work. It's an island in the Pacific. And there, people, especially young people, are never alone. Babies are never left alone, and young children are never left alone. And people like to live together and to sleep together in very close quarters. And if you're brought up in a European setting with different ideas of social space, you often would like to have your own house. So, like many anthropologists, I had my own house built. But people would come up to my house and say how sorry they were for me living alone.
In contrast, in our society, the needs of the individual are given much greater prominence over the group. Independence and the rights of the individual are highly valued.
I feel I have a responsibility to myself, I guess, to maintain my lifestyle, my apartment.
I plan my life and my activities around the things I like doing and the things I want to achieve. And, you know, not that that's such a selfish thing, but I have really no other priorities right now.
I'm responsible for giving myself whatever I have in my life. So, for making myself happy, for creating opportunities for me to express myself, whether it's, you know, doing something or being somewhere or... Yeah, I have a real responsibility to myself.
I think individualism, in the way it is being promoted or expressed in our culture today, is one of the key drivers that is contributing to a greater fragmentation of society, a loss of social cohesion, because it's inevitable that if you place the individual self at the centre of a framework of values and you celebrate independence rather than autonomy as such, then what you're going to end up doing is to weaken those personal and social links that bind people into a community.
I think we have to be careful about interpreting this trend as a sign of rampant individualism. There are many people who choose to live alone, but that doesn't mean they're isolates or hermits, or that they're committed to the culture of individualism. In fact, I have a feeling that we're on the cusp of a very significant culture shift. I mean, this is the generation of young people who are just permanently in touch with each other. When they can't see each other, they're text messaging each other, or they're on the mobile phone, or they're on the net in a chat room talking to each other. They are absolutely committed to connection. The paradox is that many of them, while they're enjoying this really intense herding behaviour socially, are perfectly happy to retreat to a dwelling where they're alone.
Living alone often means eating alone too. But sitting down to a meal on your own is not an idea that appeals to most people.
It's a lot harder cooking for one than it is cooking for two or more, or for a bunch of people. So that's where you have to really discipline yourself to cook for yourself, because you can get caught up in the fast food and living off cheese and crackers, which is that's easy to do. But you soon learn to make a big pot of something at the beginning of the week and eat it for the rest of the week, and you're fine.
Sweep from the Black Sea through to the Baltic. 3 of Central Europe's most historic cities are bearing the brunt of the floods. Dresden in eastern Germany.
Meals are to be shared. It's not just about food. It's about sharing food, conversation, atmosphere, ambience, exchanging information, making conversation. There's a whole lot of things, but I'm very careful because I live on my own, it would be very easy to walk around the house eating. I try not to do that. I actually do, no matter what it is, even if it's just cheese and biscuits, I sit down, or I might watch television and eat, but I don't walk around the house eating or eat out of a pot or anything like that.
People who live alone are far more likely to eat out of their house. So, for example, they're likely to spend something like $40 more a week on restaurants and takeaway food. If you also look at what they eat, then I think that a lot of the meal times are based around this idea of minimising the preparation and the washing up, and it's basically pretty convenience eating. The data looks like basically they peel the lid back off of baked bean cans and eat it straight out of the can with a fork.
Well, I generally eat breakfast near work, lunch near work, and then dinner on the way home, either out with friends, or if I'm just by myself, I just eat at a local sort of takeaway place most nights. Get a bit of healthy food on the way home.
Living alone doesn't mean living in isolation, without interaction with society. Many lone dwellers have strong connections to other people through family, friends and work colleagues.
Guys, just weekly update meeting just to talk about how we're going and the sales results, so get some feeling for how we're progressing. Phil, how do you think? How are you going? How are you tracking?
Yeah, the quarter's not looking too bad. A couple of opportunities on the table. Expect to see something in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, 4,500 program going okay?
Yeah, pretty good.
Work constitutes, for me, 10 to 12 hours a day, I guess, so it's a big part of my life. And the people that I work with or that work for me or my peers, we're constantly communicating. But separate from that, I mean, I've got a pretty close-knit family group. Brother and sister in Melbourne and a sister here, and she has a family I spend a lot of time with. My parents are very close to me, and they're in Adelaide.
Hi Mum, how you going? It's your son. Yep, had a good weekend. What about you? Been up the river with Dad?
Probably my strongest bond is with my daughter, and that's probably for me at the moment is my single largest connection. And then past that, it's very much with work colleagues where my strongest bond is, and the people I study with. Have you ever read George Orwell's Animal Farm? The horse, boxer, that's a nine. Will do and do. And it was only through sort of a chance meeting with a friend of mine that she mentioned a social singles group. The difficult thing when you're single is that you become the odd person out in a married environment. And I have a tendency to seek out other singles because I feel that the shift now being single, that I don't share a lot in common with married couples anymore. If there's timber in there, it's shaving, so it's not being done in barrel. Yeah, my life's different. My life probably is more diversified than what it ever was when I was married.
I do have strong ties to my family, and I think a lot of that has to do with the decision that I made. Making that decision to move out and be on my own and do something that's completely out of the ordinary for them has actually, in fact, brought us a lot closer together. I do a lot of salsa dancing, and that pretty much is the main social event that happens in my life. Well, that's the main social activity I do, and that's actually quite a good one because you meet quite a few people through it. First of all, it keeps me fit, and it keeps the weight down, which is good. But it is that social interaction which I enjoy, and it's such a happy activity. I mean, you can't help but smile when you're dancing. Because the music is just so, it is such a happy, passionate music, and I love the contact, the human contact.
It's very interesting that in our major cities where the single person dwelling is most common, with all these teeming millions of people around us, many of those people living alone involuntarily do experience a great sense of loneliness. They describe the awful moment when you come home to an empty house, especially if you've been used to cohabiting with a partner or with a family. Coming home, that moment of opening the door, particularly at night, coming into an empty house, is a chilling moment.
I guess I get lonely, but I never feel alone. I think that's the difference. I get lonely, yes, for the sound of another voice, or I hear something on the radio and it's controversial and I want to talk to somebody about it and there's nobody there. You can actually, unless you work at it, you can become very withdrawn and the world could actually pass you by. I, for instance, could live very happily within my four walls without going outside very often at all. And there's a great temptation, sometimes when you're feeling a bit low, to just shut the door, take the phone off the hook, and just live within your four walls.
I can really only think of 2 times where I feel I don't like living on my own, and that is when I'm sick. I think when you're sick and you're the most vulnerable and you have no one here to sort of look after you, when you're used to having someone look after you, that's when I feel I don't like it. And when I have a dinner party or when I have friends over and everyone leaves, and from this big, noisy, great bunch of people laughing and carrying on to silence and me cleaning up on my own, I guess they're the only really, they're the only times I can think of right now that remind me of the lonely times.
I get very lonely at times, and it's a sense of loneliness that creeps on, and it's not sort of, something you feel, oh, geez, I'm all of a sudden alone. It's, for me, I catch myself every now and again, and I think, I'm here, I'm alone. It's not in the fact of being lonely, because I can meet people, I can talk to people, but it is that I'm alone, in life.
I never get lonely. Got plenty of people in my life, got lots of people that care about me and lots of people that I can spend time with, and good family and good friends and good work colleagues and a great job and, pretty good lifestyle, so I never feel lonely.
Many people living the single household lifestyle find the freedom to fulfil their own needs very satisfying. The question is whether that feeling of independence comes at the expense of sharing intimate relationships.
There's a huge body of psychological literature that says that people need strong, lasting personal relationships, a certain number of them, in order to fulfil their psychological needs and to be happy. And it's those relationships, those really deep relationships that matter most. It's not the number of acquaintances you have, it's not the number of parties you go to and outings and social engagements. They're much less important than having those deeply intimate relationships to people's happiness.
I think we like to give. I think we feel good about giving things, even if it's something simple like a meal or a cup of tea or sharing something like that. But I think we get a sense of self, a sense of our place in the universe, all of that. A really central part of who we are comes from being part of a group, not necessarily just a couple, but part of a group.
We have a unique capacity, I think, for adaptability. And there are circumstances when humans need to be on their own and when they are able to be on their own. But I think we don't really like being on our own. So you might say that where we have a need for other humans, we have a capacity to be on our own if we have to.
I think the real problem comes, and it comes sooner or later in just about everyone's life, is when you don't get those things. When things start to go wrong at a personal level, and it's at that time when those close, intimate, personal relationships are so important in supporting you, and I think that's really the crunch time, and that will be the issue that determines whether or not these new forms of relationship can actually fulfil people's need for intimacy.
I can't see myself being alone for forever. It's just not within my nature. It will be the form of the relationship. Whether it will be cohabiting, I'm unsure of that. So for me, you know, it may be a totally different relationship to what we're used to. Maybe a permanent part-time. I can't say that I won't meet someone that totally bowl me over. I think it's a brave person who will ever say that I'm going to be on my own for the rest of my life.
Living with a partner in a relationship is great. It's fantastic. If circumstances were different, I obviously wouldn't be alone. If I had met someone, or I was with someone that I wanted to be with forever, or live with, then I wouldn't be alone. So it is quite circumstantial. But that's okay. You know, I'm quite happy with that card being dealt or not being dealt. You know, I think that it's important to be happy on your own, and then you'll be happy with someone else as well.
I wouldn't want it to be a permanent situation, but the truth of the matter is that I may be on my own. So I have to try and structure a life that I can live without somebody in, and yet I have room for somebody to come into should I be lucky enough to find somebody. And it's not just a matter of luck, it's actually, you know, my choice as to how much I'll compromise. I won't know till I meet somebody and decide whether I can make those sorts of compromises to allow this person in, and whether in fact they'll make the compromises that they need to make to step into my world with me.
Ideally, it would be nice to have a partner to share the life with. I mean, that's. I think everyone would like that companionship, and I'm certainly no exception. That's exactly where I'd like to be. But that's until then. I guess I know that I can do it on my own.
Well, that provocative report, in the best possible sense of the word, was produced by Paul Sneller. Since filming was completed, I have to tell you that Alec Gardner, who appeared in the program, is no longer living alone. He's remarried and is now sharing a home with his new partner, and we wish them a very happy future together.